We have the FBI director, we have the defense secretary, we have people surrounding Donald Trump, Elon Musk himself, who has been for several years now parroting Russian propaganda from his online tech bro friends like David Sachs and others. So we shouldn't be surprised indeed. But of course, some people probably thought that there is like some kind of grand master plan of a very creative art of the deal business guru. Uh, Hopefully now, even the most pro Trump, I was going to say pro Putin and pro Trump people realize that this is not the case.
Hello and welcome to Frontline, Times Radio's interview series about the war in Ukraine and global security. I'm James Hansen, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Vlad Mykhnenko. Originally from Ukraine, Vlad is a professor of sustainable urban development at the University of Oxford who specialises in geographical political economy. Vlad, it's always a pleasure. Welcome back to Frontline.
Morning, James. Morning. Thank you for inviting me again.
Now, first of all, I wanted to get your reaction to the news we've had from the White House overnight, which is that the US is pausing military aid to Ukraine. What is your reaction?
On the one hand, we shouldn't be surprised, and yet, of course, I think a lot of us are feeling quite upset and disappointed and astonished by that decision, because I think the White House under Donald Trump never surprises to surprise us.
And this, I think, is something that I personally find very frustrating. The fact that you have defenders of Donald Trump who argue that he's trying to be some kind of honest broker in this process, and ignore the fact that consistently since returning to office, at the very least, he has taken the side of Russia, whether that is excluding Ukraine from peace talks, whether that is increasingly parroting Kremlin talking points, whether it's his treatment of Zelensky in the Oval Office on Friday. Do you get frustrated that there are still people who are surprised and shocked by US policy on this?
Well, those people are definitely disingenuous. I cannot claim, I cannot question their mental agility. And then I think the only reason to behave like that is just they're trying to carry favor with MAGA crowd, with the current administration for particular personal gains, professional gains, career gains, because there is no other way you can describe this. As you've said, we shouldn't be surprised because what we've seen is the entourage, the milieu that President Trump has surrounded himself with, right? He appointed the most deranged conspiracy theorists to the highest position in the land. The National Intelligence Director is a fairly bizarre conspiracy theorist who parrots the most bizarre Russian propaganda points about Ukrainian American biolabs. I wish we had biolabs, and I wish we could use those secret weapons and unleash them on Putin somehow. But sadly, they don't exist. We have the FBI director, we have the defense secretary, we have people surrounding Donald Trump, Elon Musk himself, who has been for several years now parroting Russian propaganda from his online tech bro friends like David Sachs and others. So we shouldn't be surprised indeed. But of course, some people probably thought that there is like some kind of grand master plan of a very creative art of the deal business guru. Hopefully now, even the most pro Trump, I was going to say pro Putin and pro Trump people realize that this is not the case.
There are two ways of looking at this, Vlad. You could either say this is the US abandoning Ukraine, or you could go further and say this is the US switching sides. Which do you see it as?
I definitely see this as switching sides. And I definitely wouldn't be. I think we should start contemplating scenarios that the US would try to assassinate President Zelensky and to remove him physically from power, given the level of rhetoric, given what President Trump yesterday said, the people who opposes him don't go on for very long. I think that is a thinly veiled threat. We see that even before the Friday disaster meeting in the Oval Office, U.S. Unnamed spokesman leaking messages from the White House to every newspaper saying that Zelensky should run away to France. And today you see Elon Musk tweeting on his social media platform that we should offer him amnesty in a neutral country. Some kind of absolutely bizarre and obscene statements. So I think this is definitely another sign of this White House and this American administration effectively not just becoming the enemy of Ukraine, but becoming the enemy of the West.
Which raises the question, what should Ukraine's remaining allies do? We had this meeting of European leaders, the head of NATO, and also the Prime Minister of Canada in London over the weekend, and they came up with a 4-point plan to help Ukraine end the war. Is that already out of date now?
The plan itself is probably the plan itself is not out of date. What needs to be done, before Friday, is of course putting a lot of detail into that plan. More countries should come forward offering troops. More countries should come forward offering more help. We hear from Norway there are movements on a larger scale investment into Ukrainian defense industry and help, which is of course great. We need definitely a faster movement on the European front. We know there is a meeting on Thursday in Brussels. Uh, we already know there are oppositions to any help to Ukraine. Hungary is allegedly derailing any EU aid efforts of an extra 20 billion euro help. Presumably Slovakia is also there. So you have the Trojan horses of Trump administration inside Europe. So that will be a tricky situation. But I think the coalition of the willing kind of motto is a good one because obviously not all NATO member states will be involved, and not all EU member states could be involved given the Hungarian Slovakian opposition to any help. So some creative thinking needs to be done very, very fast, right? If you want to create uh, a strong position for negotiation, more help needed, and it will be very, very difficult without the US support.
Well, this is the difficulty because having a coalition of the willing, which a lot of people take to mean primarily France and Britain may be providing peacekeeping troops on the ground in Ukraine, requires, or certainly in the view of Keir Starmer and I sense Emmanuel Macron, requires some kind of US backstop that they talk about, which presumably would mean, I don't know, air cover or the ultimate threat of US troops on the ground if Russia were to breach the peace. That now seems incredibly unlikely. So is a coalition of the willing enough of a deterrent against future Russian aggression in your view?
European and British politicians have not been used to take risk for decades and decades, and I'm afraid this is time that they need to start taking risks. Also, what of course is needed is the German coalition talks to go fast, and for Germany to appoint a chancellor, Friedrich Merz, as soon as possible, given that Germany is the crucial part of that jigsaw puzzle, and without Germany, not a lot of things will happen in Europe. Hence, that's another thing that needs to happen very, very fast.
Especially because Friedrich Merz has been far more hawkish towards Russia than Olaf Scholz was.
And Friedrich Merz also has been much more realistic in his recent announcements about the US position, right? Whilst we all understand President Macron and Prime Minister Starmer trying to diplomatically tolerate President Trump's antics and trying to kind of manage him in the most favorable way to Europe and Britain, and that of course needs to be applauded. Those efforts. Deep inside, everybody understands what's going on, right? Deep inside, everybody understands that NATO is being demolished, and hence a new European security architecture needs to be constructed without the Trojan horses of Moscow or Washington, and with people who are willing and able of putting up enough resource, enough resolve, and enough security forces up front.
You said a moment ago, Vlad, that you think Europe needs to take more risks. What would those risks look like in reality?
Well, a no-fly zone on western parts of Ukraine, which could be enforced with the current air forces that even UK and France already have, not to mention also all the other neighboring countries. That would be a great start. The problem with the US aid not being given is primarily, well, not primarily, there are lots of problems, James. But sort of the basic things is, of course, air defense, and anti-missile cover. So that's Patriot missiles is the first and foremost problem, which we're not. Ukraine didn't have enough of them anyway, and now we have none of them, and that means that the bombardment and rocket attacks on Ukrainian cities and civilian deaths will increase dramatically. One way to mitigate that would be a no-fly zone, which also can protect Ukrainian cities, at least some of them, from missile attacks. So that is a plausibility, and I think that is not extremely risky, given that we are talking about shooting down rockets rather than shooting down Russian planes, right? So the level of risk could be managed. But this is kind of stuff we are talking about. And I think this is kind of stuff that President Macron of France and Prime Minister Starmer of Britain kind of vaguely mention, right, in various statements. The level of vagueness, of course, is due to creating strategical ambiguity. But I think now we need to slightly move on towards a more clarity.
And I think that's the key point, is that France, the UK, and Germany in particular need to do more still. And yes, they've been very supportive of Ukraine up until this point, but it's the old sort of saying, the old criticism that they've given Ukraine enough not to lose, but not enough to win. And maybe Germany needs to look again, once Friedrich Merz is Chancellor, at, for example, providing tourist missiles. France, which, yes, has been very supportive publicly of Ukraine, and the rhetoric from President Macron has been very encouraging in recent weeks and months. But if you look at what France has actually provided in raw spending to Ukraine, it pales into insignificance compared to the UK and Germany. So this is a time for European leaders to look themselves in the mirror, is it not?
Absolutely true. And there are other countries as well there, right, on the southern part of Europe that not only don't have enough to provide, but also haven't given much. So, yes, there are lots of difficult questions, but I hope, James, that the European leaders understand the gravity of this moment. And if before they were not willing to let Russia be defeated, the fear of Russian collapse has been huge. Now the fear of Ukrainian collapse should be much huger, because just just we need to understand that if Russian troops overrun Ukraine, all those millions of Ukrainian battle-hardened soldiers, after a year or two of crazy brainwashing, will be turned against Europe, right? And you will have a double army attacking Western European allies, because this is exactly what the Russians have done on the Ukrainian occupied territory. They mobilized all men capable of walking, and threw them to the midgrind of the war. And of course, after some horrific defeat, it will not be that difficult for the Russians to manipulate Ukrainian psyche into sort of, you've been betrayed by all these Anglo-Saxon degenerates, and now you have to actually should have fought with us on the kind of Slavic Orthodox front, whatever. So you can it's a dark scenario, but it should not be totally disregarded. So there is a clear and present danger of that situation collapsing and turning into something much more nightmarish than it is now, and hence every effort very fast needs to be put. All of these countries need to step up really, really fast.
A couple of other practical suggestions of things that could be done right now to help Ukraine. First of all, is this not finally the time to seize the frozen Russian assets and to use them to fund Ukraine's defense?
Because it is a very desperate situation, but also it is a force majeure of incredible level, right? This is not some kind of a grab of money for no reason. And over the last 3 years, there were quite significant international law experts coming up with quite a credible plan of how this could happen without jeopardizing the Western kind of financial markets and the standing of dollar or Europe as reserve currencies. It is a risky proposition on one hand, and yet at the same time, we already know there have been a number of legal experts with huge level of expertise who proposed a fairly decent way of doing it without damaging the reputation of Brussels, Paris, London, Frankfurt as financial markets. So I think this is the way, another very crucial kind of screw that Europe can kind of start using against Moscow.
I suppose one of the practical difficulties with doing it is given all the messaging coming out of the White House currently, they are unlikely to be in favour of it. And if the European countries decided to seize those assets and use it to fund Ukraine's defence, is there not a risk that the US lifts some economic sanctions on Russia?
It is very plausible that will happen anyway, first of all. And I think what is even more important is that the dismantling of the American state, central state, by Elon Musk and his Doge uh, department has already led to the effectual, in effect, to the gradual uh, ease of sanctions regime, because there are no enough officials left in finance departments, in enforcement regimes who are capable of doing that. So they're sucking people left, right, and center, and they're sucking people disregarding their expertise. So a lot of people who are chasing Russian assets or chasing Russian shadow tankers or chasing Russian financial transactions are gone, right? So the sanctions regime every day is weaker and weaker and weaker. Without it's been officially demolished or destroyed. It's been destroyed from within by Elon Musk and his acolytes.
The other practical suggestion I wanted to put to you is this idea that now is the time for Ukraine to lower the conscription age below 25. And look, I know it's very easy for me as a British person sitting here in a warm studio in London to suggest that the Ukrainian youth should be sent out to fight and die on the front line. But is that the reality of the situation we're now facing, Vlad?
Absolutely true. Total mobilization is what is a necessity, perhaps encouraging also female fighters to join the front line. Probably you would go even further than that. You would probably reconsider the non-proliferation treaty that Ukraine signed in 1994, that was supposed to be guaranteed by the US, UK, France, and Russia, and with Chinese support. Uh, that is one way of deterring future invasion. It sounds quite horrible, but I think desperate times call for desperate measures, and there is already enough of the capacity to deliver particular warheads one 1,000 miles away from Kiev. So I think there is a way of um, making a decision now and try to testing the nuclear weapons that Ukraine surely is capable of producing.
We hope you're enjoying today's episode of Frontline. Don't forget, you can also now listen to Frontline in podcast form. Just search for The World in 10 from wherever you get your podcasts, where you can also hear daily analysis of the biggest stories relating to war and defence. And we'll put a link to The World in 10 in the description below. What do you think Vlad Zelensky should do about the minerals deal with the US, which a lot of people expected to be signed last Friday when he went to Washington? We all know why that wasn't signed on that day. Then on Sunday evening, he gave an interview in which he suggested he was still prepared to sign it. But now we've had the pausing of US military aid. Should he still sign that deal?
As far as I understand, I mean, we are still deciphering the choreography of that Friday disaster day in Oval Office. Uh, but listening to the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent recently, who kind of revealed some, and also the David Lutnick, the Trade Secretary, they revealed a few interesting, intriguing parts of that discussion that we haven't seen on the television screens, obviously. Is that, as far as I understand, James, and you've been having these discussions for the last 3 days, is that President Zelensky was forced to sign a capitulation to Moscow prior to the mineral deal being agreed, because Scott Bessent talked about sequencing being peace deal first, then economic deal second. And of course, we haven't seen a peace deal being in any form or shape. What we've heard previously from the US officials like Steve Witkoff is that the so-called Istanbul declaration was supposed to be the basis of that. And Istanbul declaration of 2022 was a surrender capitulation agreement, that not agreement, the offer to capitulate and surrender that Moscow gave to Ukraine back then when the Russian troops were near Kiev or in Kiev itself. So it looks like the American administration has tried to use the surrender offer Moscow gave Ukraine in April 2022 again as a prior deal before the not very significant minerals deal, and I think that probably actually started the whole tense ten well that fire emitting I think that was set off by the capitulation offer.
Where do you stand on the principle of the deal? Because you could argue it two different ways. You could say, look, this is mercantilism, this is colonialism from the US, exploiting Ukraine in its hour of need, attempting to extract more of Ukraine's GDP than was extracted from Germany after the end of World War One. I mean, it is a pretty shocking state of affairs. The counter argument would be, indeed, an argument that Trump himself has advanced, which is, look, if you have American contractors on the ground tapping into Ukraine's mineral resources, that will be a disincentive against Putin launching further aggression against Ukraine. How do you see those two arguments, Vlad?
Haven't read the draft agreement that we've all seen been released by the Financial Times and a few other outlets. Well, it's a framework agreement that doesn't have much teeth in it, apart from the fact that Ukraine will have to commit 50% of its mineral resources to a reconstruction fund, which doesn't seem to be too bad, meaning that 50% will be taken over by the US, which is, as you said, fairly tough. Yet the level of mineral wealth, the types of rare earths and minerals, critical minerals, is all kind of a very unclear situation, given we don't know how much, how long it will take, decades and decades to do, to require enormous amount of private capital. So I'm not entirely worried about the minerals deal as it stands. Uh, and I understand that in our kind of dreams, it would be great to give Trump some kind of a deal so he can throw it to MAGA supporters saying, I've got 350 billion out of thin air. That was our probably big hopes. But it looks like that comes with the capitulation surrender to Moscow, because we haven't seen any actually discussion in the US or what this peace deal is, right? What are they discussing with Moscow about, apart from opening the spy factories, which is the called Russian embassy, mega embassy in the US, right? So they're discussing the reestablishment of diplomatic relations on the sites that was shut down in 2022, but we haven't seen what the Russians are offering, what the Americans are pushing them to. So I think switching sides is exactly uh, perfect description, because effectively they are now working together with Moscow to push Ukraine to surrender, and that's exactly how we should look at it.
Do you fear that they may achieve it?
I don't feel that may achieve it, because it's not Zelensky that's the problem, right? It's Ukrainian people that's the problem. And what do they? I mean, literally, what do they expect? Do they expect to get rid of an annoying, heroic war figure, and to get some kind of a less annoying heroic war figure? I mean, the National Intelligence Directorate, before Tulsi Gabbard took over that office, knew perfectly well that the second most popular politician in Ukraine is Ukrainian ambassador to the UK, General Zaluzhny, right? And is General Zaluzhny will be are more willing to sign a surrender agreement? I would doubt that. And apart from Zaluzhny and Zelensky, there are other letters in Ukrainian alphabet, James, not just Z. But those two effectively now occupy the Ukrainian political spectrum, and none of them is willing to surrender. And hence, I don't quite see how removing Zelensky and installing somebody else, or even democratically installing somebody else, will going to help Putin and Trump to work through the Ukrainian problem.
And how popular is Zelensky in Ukraine at the moment? Because we've seen all this disinformation from Trump saying that he's unpopular and calling him a dictator because they haven't held elections. In reality, how popular is he among ordinary Ukrainians currently?
The latest established and trusted opinion polls we had was in early February, before all this happened. And back then, Zelensky had a net approval rating of plus 20%, and an approval rating of 57%, which was above Trump's 45. So obviously, coming down from 99% in February 2022, it is a big climb down to 57%. But still, you have the majority of people trusting you, and I bet now his approval ratings are much higher than that, because there is obviously rallying around the flag, as you would expect. So I would suspect his approval rank is now probably reaching 2/3 of the population, and that means his position is very strong domestically, which means that he will be less willing to surrender to the most bizarre demands from Washington D.C. and Moscow.
Just finally, Vlad, what is your message for Ukraine's European allies? This is clearly the moment to step up, but what does stepping up look like? What would you like to hear more of from Starmer, Macron, Merz, Mark Rutte, the key figures in Ukraine's European allies?
I mean, obviously trying to patch up the relationship between Kiev and Washington D.C., which is fine if they can do it, if they can use any leverage that they can have. Giorgia Meloni has offered her help. She is the only far right politician in Europe that is pro-Ukrainian and also has some friends in America. So Giorgia Meloni could be uh, a breach of some kind, if possible. The main thing is to effectively try to buy up some time, right? Try to get U.S. weapons one way or another, whether to buy them directly from Americans. I would hope they would not bar that. Get Ukrainian weapons, get American weapons somehow. Try to push up the relations as you are restructuring the security infrastructure, knowing what is going to happen anyway, knowing that Article 5 doesn't exist anymore.
Vlad, we always appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us again on Frontline.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Frontline. For early access to our videos, member-only Q&As and live streams, then sign up for a membership via the link in the description. And for the latest news and breaking stories, listen to Times Radio and follow us at thetimes.com.